Well, hello there, listeners. The topic for this month's show is supposed to be about the one-year COVID anniversary, but we're not going to do that. As a group, we're sick and tired of retreading the same topics about how are we responding to COVID and how are we doing hybrid spaces and what do you think about this model camera or this model DSP. And we're not going to talk about how to clean your touch panels or have we considered touchless AV in any of our spaces. So instead, we're going to present an episode of this very show, but from 20 years in the future. Each of us will present our vision of what our institutions will be doing in 2041, and from that, you'll be able to glean some information on those topics I mentioned a moment ago. But if you do want a quick hint, pedagogy and audio. And with that said, on with the show. This is AV SuperFriends On Topic, a 30-minute monthly roundtable focused on a single topic. This discussion will be opinionated, to the point, and saturated with our well-known blend of painfully won expertise and deeply ingrained immaturity. For March 2041, it's the AV SuperFriends On Topic. Well, welcome back, everybody. It's time for another podcast adventure with the AV SuperFriends. My name's Chris Decter. I'm joined today by Justin, Larry, Rachel, Jamie, and Mark. And, well, I've got some bad news for today's show. The holographic system is not recording properly, and the feel-around system is having licensing issues. So we're going audio only. So I know it's disappointing to those of you listening on Podcasting 4.0, but we'll do what we can. Additionally, we can't get to our shared files because Internet 4 is down. So instead, honestly, I figure it's been a while since we've talked over what our campuses are up to just kind of in general. So we're going to do a general conversation about what our universities are doing here in 2041. So, Justin, I understand you guys have installed a brand new all-in-wonder system that does everything you need it to do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So, yeah, you guys remember that story I told you all about back in, 2029, 2030, when everybody got really super pissed about technology. There was, a backlash of all this. There's too much tech, too many cameras, too many microphones. So we appeased some faculty and basically sectioned off some of our buildings, and they're just whiteboard spaces. But there's a few groups of faculty that still want to, do hybrid learning and all this stuff. And we started an RFP, and what we realized is 3M started making a product similar to what we were looking for. And it's basically think of it like a Microsoft Surface that you can just roll out on the front wall. It comes in 4x4 feet sections. And so we're going through this RFP to figure out what our standard classroom looks like going forward. And can you believe that there's some goober in the back that asks, how are you going to clean this surface? After all the crap and the shit we've been through over the last, 20 years, they're still asking the same question over and over. But
and there's still people afraid
everything else went pretty well.
Get their hands dirty. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is, since we work in IT, we basically roll out a configuration on these things, plug them up to an Ethernet, and we're still doing that, right? And we can manage everything. They got like a built-in camera and microphone just for some generic stuff. They got whiteboard space, and it all basically uploads to our eLearning platform. If you wanted to, if you don't want it to, you don't have to. And so the faculty really seem to be, positively accepting this. I think it's going to be super easy to deal with from an IT perspective. It's going to be a lot less infrastructure costs, a lot less support costs down the road. These things are super cheap too. You can put one in, cover a 30 by 30 generic classroom for roughly about $5,000, including labor. So I think costs have come down quite a bit, and we're probably going to roll out a couple hundred of these, I think.
And was that $5,000 in old U.S. greenbacks, or is that $5,000 in international currency standard?
Oh, I'm talking Bitcoin, right? The international currency standard. So yeah, 5,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah, I've actually been considering redoing my living room in these. Actually, starting to see them in Resi applications too.
Yeah, it's there's some potential there, but we'll see. What about Larry? What are you up to?
It's been a crazy day. I've had to check on the status of a new lab at the nursing hub Then I had to go down to the downtown regional hub and do a new seminar room. And then I had to come back on campus to sign off on 4 new VCR rooms, that virtual recording classroom studio. And that was all before I could make it back to meet with you. We created an industry around being virtual, but honestly, I'm spending more time traveling to on-site places now than before COVID happened in the first place. And when we decided to focus on what pedagogies work really well asynchronously and then found avenues to make the rest more active, it's allowed us to create a lot of really cool learning spaces, but it's freaking wearing me out visiting all of our hubs every time a different department needs a new space. I'm not complaining.
How are these hubs?
The flipped university model.
Yeah, go ahead.
The flipped university model, it's significantly reduced the total number of classrooms, but they're spread out all over the places. Students are only spending the first 2 years on the main campus, and even then they're only in class half the time. The other half, when they're doing lectures, it's all online. And because of that, we get access to the rooms. We're able to spend more time on the replacement cycle, but it's still just a crazy amount of work doing all these unique spaces everywhere.
So why is it so decentralized now, though? I mean, you keep talking about, over the years, you keep talking about these little pods popping up. What's driving that?
Because we're trying to make sure that the classes, when they get to those upper level courses, they're getting exposure to the industry. It's almost like internship, but instead of sending one student out, we send the experts in and they have them intermingle. Plus,
and people won't commute anymore.
Absolutely not.
It's too expensive.
And this way, the continuing education for your nursing departments, for your theater departments, everything, it's right there. It's really the only way universities could remain relevant.
Yeah, we started with one of those back in 2016, I think it was. Our nursing department partnered with that hospital downtown, but that's the only department that did that. Yeah, I know. And that's still around. They're still doing their thing. So I guess it got popular over in North Carolina.
Yeah, well, and we're actually launching a new program next week where we have the lecturer on the main campus teaching on Monday and Tuesday. And then on all 6 of our current hubs, they're doing the active learning portions of the class with teacher's assistants. So we've got the one professor teaching a couple hundred students in an active learning session. If it works, I can see us opening up about double the amount of our traditional hubs.
Sounds cool.
So Larry, how are you doing active learning in such a large space now? I know we've been trying that for probably close to 30 years and have had mixed success, but how's that working for you guys?
Honestly, most of our active learning spaces aren't that large. When you can fit a couple hundred people on the online learning sections of it, and you're just using teacher's assistants to do the active learning, you can keep the group sizes down to, 40 to 60 somewhere in there. It's pretty easy to manage that amount.
So do you find your tenured faculty gets more writing done, more research done because they don't have to bother with actual physical students? They just have their TAs do that for them?
Yeah, and the research
TAs
has really been a boon to it.
So are you guys using actual TAs or using the robots?
Mixture of both.
Yeah, we don't have TAs. I think we kind of went backwards.
Ones? The virtual ones? Great.
No. We're more traditional brick and mortar class. We kind of went the other route for whatever reason.
Meat TAs?
Seems to be popular.
Yeah, the old school.
Nice.
The flesh ones.
OT, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Mark?
Bags.
Which branded classroom are you on this week?
Well, it's kind of crazy. You talked about all that distributed classrooms all over the state. And that was kind of what we were up against, 15, 20 years ago. We had all these branch campuses and all these embedded extension offices, and the university said, we need to make a common experience. What's the most affordable way we can make a common experience? And then obviously we all saw it. We saw it coming. We saw the big manufacturers of the world. And at that point, the university signed with Amazon. And so here we were. We did 750 Amazon branded rooms, complete with Amazon backgrounds on our displays and all their hybrid virtual net endpoints. And it was a mess, right? And so I'm now in the process of going through the new contract. So we just signed with Google. So now I have to go back through every location across the state. Got to go into every MDF, IDF, pull out all the Amazon boxes, swap them out with the Google HyperNet with the, the ones that have that quad glass core liquid terminated adapter in, the ones that's just a pain in the ass. So dealing with that, we've got tons of people all over the state calling all these subs, and it wouldn't be that bad if the boxes were like more straightforward, but every time you even want to order a new one, every person on site who's going to touch the box has to download 72 hours of training cycles from the web, right? So that's like a 2-hour process to download 72 hours of training for every single person who's going to unbox one of these units, which is kind of ridiculous. But anyway, so that was the contract. They said, no, we're gonna swap it. We're gonna go from Amazon. We're gonna go to the new Google. So we're moving all the new classrooms, complete with displays and endpoints, to every MDF, IDF. But it has been good because with the contracts we're seeing and the alignments with other schools, is we have the Google Cloud, complete cloud classroom experience now. So we can finally get rid of all the backcore classes. So that's good or bad. I don't really know. We had to get rid of a lot of professors, but we no longer have to have backcore classes because we just subscribe to Google. We have access to all the Common Core curriculum, and now we can just do higher end level classes. I think one of the biggest...
That sounds complicated.
It is, but you don't need to kind of waste all that time anymore with all the basic classroom, right? We just log on. Every student has access to the Google Cloud class, and they get to take whatever class they want to take. And it's all just common. So we have the same curriculum that I think it's like Eastern Kentucky or whatever that was. So like we have a very parallel experience now. And so that's been pretty good.
3M was a good partnership.
Yeah, it worked out. I think one of the biggest complaints we had though with the old Amazon system, Larry, I think you had a couple of these, is like all of our professors got pissed when we took away the VGA. So we had to bring VGA back. But it's cool now. We got VGAs back, the Super 15 or Super 15 pin 16K version of the VGA. It still looks the same, pretty much acts the same way. I kind of don't even think VGA is ever going to go away, to be honest. But it's been okay. I think it's been a lot of work, but I think the common, branded experience for all of the universities kind of in this co-op will be good for the students, maybe not for the instructors, but once we get through some of these infrastructure pieces, the multi-glass and all that stuff. But it's a lot of work, but we have a common experience, and we're branded like everybody else across the country now. And so it's been okay.
So the students don't complain about getting ads during the classes?
They did early on, but when they realized they could actually market off and make money off those the same way, they had access to the same advertising portal. So we see a lot of like weird stuff, but it wouldn't be as bad if they didn't mandate X amount of pixel percent of the screen that has to be accessible all the time. So that's kind of annoying when you have like the old PowerPoint from like 2025, and then it's like the 4.3 version that's still going around, but then you have ads around that white background. It's a little bit annoying, but for the most part, students don't seem to care. As long as their watches and all their tablets and stuff like that can connect to Wi-Fi, they're already entertained.
See, we actually fixed that by just making the standard size a 4x3 and just selling the letter boxes.
See,
you could also just put tape around the edges and just black that out. That's what we did.
Is that what you're doing?
3M tried to advertise.
Panels?
Yeah.
Man, Western Kentucky and your analog solutions for digital problems.
Hey, it works.
What did you do to clean the tape residue off?
We just left it there.
Just left it.
Just stacked tape on top of tape.
We actually had a policy that we couldn't advertise on campus. That's kind of been the legacy thing back in 2001,
Really?
2002.
Really? That is old school.
And so we just kind of left it there. Like, we couldn't allow outside companies advertise through our digital signage system back in 2020.
Wow.
So it's just kind of been there. So we've had to get revenue from different ways. So, we've basically, either blacked it out. They're working on a firmware update where they're just going to not put ads around that for us.
So do you actually get any of that revenue sharing that they promised? Because they say, oh, you guys are going to get a windfall of money. I don't think we've ever saw any of that money. We say all these ads, but we never get anything.
We did it
new.
first, and then it stopped. Yeah, it stops right? And then, our purchasing department has to keep up with it because I don't see the money and there's so many people involved.
They fixed the problem.
Hey, Mark, I got a quick question for you on changing out those appliances from the Amazon appliances to the Google ones. Now, I understand the Amazon ones were thankfully actually appropriately rack mountable, but the Google ones are a different form factor. So what are you guys having to do are you like just putting them on shelves or?
Well, we were, but it's really weird because they're 3.5 rack tall, but they're only like a third rack wide, which is real odd. But so we tip them on their sides and kind of slide them in, and it works with a couple of zip ties. It's not the prettiest thing, but we figured after 3 more years we'll be swapping them out anyway.
You haven't had any overheating problems or anything weird, right?
What was that?
Them being on their side? Any overheating problems?
They said don't worry about it. I mean, they get hot as hell. They're super hot, but they said no, just go with it.
Yeah.
So we just put them in there. We're hoping. But.
Related to that, you guys remember that company Cisco from like 20 years ago? That was
a contract company, right? They just I just got bills from them. I never got any. I never saw anything they made.
Yeah, I mean, but their appliances, they were all rack mountable. They would crush them to the smallest number of RUs possible, and they would just constantly be just cranking out heat. It was always aggravating to no end. So it's I know they got bought up years ago by was it Microsoft who then got bought by somebody? I don't know, but
I thought they just made fans. I thought those were always just rack fans that were just screaming loud.
Yeah, well, no, they were heat pumps to ensure that your IDF was always at least 80 degrees.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. It was expensive.
It also was a good way to test your occupancy sensors based on noise, because you could know if there was any Cisco gear in the building anywhere, you'd hear it. So it was a good test. Well, that's interesting. We need to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Do you have a question for the AV SuperFriends, a topic to suggest, or were we just really, really wrong on something and you'd like to give us a piece of your mind? Well, don't just yell at your computer. Send us an email and we'll actually read it. Mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. We're always looking for good ideas to steal, discuss openly. And if your message is just full of great stuff, we might just invite you on the show. Mailbag@avsuperfriends.com.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining the Super Friends today as we kind of examine our lifestyles today. It's been rough, I'll tell you, over the last 20 years. I know when we started this endeavor, this podcast, what was it, some 600 episodes ago, we had the virus, the great plague of 2020, that just really kind of brought out some of the realities of how dysfunctional some of our society has become, and higher ed and education funding was a big kick to that, and I can't wait. I'm just trying to eke out till retirement. I'm almost there. But I know some of you guys have been fortunate. You've been working at universities where you have all this really cool stuff, and but I'm not there. In fact, I know that a lot of state universities don't even exist anymore. They were all purchased by, like Mark's saying, by giant conglomerates, and they're purely and strictly profit-driven systems. There are a few that are still academic-based, but they're priced to a point where only the super elite can attend. Most everybody else in this country right now is dependent upon. They're truly homeschooled, because even the early education, whenever the schools decided that they didn't have to have buildings anymore, that we'll just give kids a Chromebook, and again, let's go back to Google, and they'll be fine. Well, the digital divide became even more real because people couldn't afford the service. They couldn't afford people to come out and put internet connections on and telephones. So kids, a lot of the population went backwards. And most kids they're stunted by their learning, their education from their parents, and they can only really glean as much education as their parents had. Some kids are doing well, and some kids know how to fight. That's the reality of it right now. Now I've been lucky, right? I made it through a lot of those consolidations and the corporate buyouts, and my final role, I'm in my last year or two as chief nerdologist at the Kansas City branch of McDonald's Harvard University. Now, it exists in that way, but you still have to buy your education in Happy Meal sizes, and you get what you get. You get your magic McDonald's box, and some people get a degree in there, and some people get fries that weren't cooked all the way, or kangaroo meat.
It's part of the fun, though.
They still get the toy, though.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know how many times I went through that drive-through trying to get the Happy Meal that came with the degree in computer science in it. Like, I got so many freaking phys ed degrees.
Yeah, I couldn't get the final
before
one.
I
Everybody
got to the
wanted
CS
that
degree.
final one, that final little token.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to those days. You remember some 25 years ago, the McDonald's Monopoly thing, where you got to pull off the little things, right? And you only get a degree if you get the matching deals, right? And nobody ever gets the matching deal. It's just a big
but they
scam.
found out. Did you hear they found out that it was a scam? That it was only people whose parents had the degree who could get the degree. Yeah.
Well, I think that's why nobody's going to university right now, because they figured out that it's just really McDonald's way of making money on the Harvard University name.
I thought it was funny when they mandated everybody had to buy the at-home technology, right? So we all, by law, had to purchase all of the books, and it's like, okay, they made it quasi more affordable, but then they just upped the price of everybody's internet, because it went from being like $100 a month to almost $400 a month just for access, which seemed crazy to me.
Well, I gotta tell you, I can't wait. Like I said, I'm so close to retirement, because I'm really tired of my days now. I mean, I used to spend days experimenting with new technologies and things, and now I spend my entire day, every single day, helping train the system robots for the AV robots to recognize the voice and hand gestures of all the elitist faculty members, because they don't want to touch anything and they don't like asking for help. And so they want to be able to wave their hands in the air and a slide changes and or speak to it, and yet they get really angry when the robot doesn't understand whatever their word was. So I'm just done. I'm done with it. I can't wait till it's over, because education, once that funding goes crazy and goes corporate. Ugh.
Do you allow your professors to choose if they want students or not in classes? I found that was crazy, because all of our instructors decided they didn't want to have students in their class. Are you seeing a lot of the same thing, where you just have instructors who want to teach to just nobody?
Yeah, most of them are. They're there to hear themselves talk. So no, there's not really any students there, and because it's it's the value menu of education. You buy the number one, and the number one is, it used to be a quarter pounder with cheese, and now it's the philosophy degree. And sometimes you can get the Super Bowl tailgate package, and you get a master's.
Yeah. But it's do you see the students that just game it instead of actually taking the harder course? They just take more of the cheap course, and it's well, you're kind of defeating it. But the school's well, we'll just keep taking your money, I guess. After 5 years,
they just keep taking the money.
They'll print them out a certificate and says you've served enough time.
And the reality is that most of the elitists, they're getting those jobs anyway, right? So the instructors don't care, as long as when they say go, and they say I'm going to record, and that's what most of my problem is because instead of say recording now, the next person says I want to record. Well, the robot's got to relearn that language, and that's what I get to do every single day.
Do you deploy the audience robots? Because this is another it started with COVID with the sporting events and things like that. But I've heard of some institutions training audience robots to give the professors validation when they're teaching to empty rooms. Applaud, whisper that they're great, ask them to sign their textbooks, that kind of thing.
No, most of my professors and most of my faculty members at this point have come from the YouTube generation, where they're used to just taking their cell phone and doing selfies and speaking to the world as a whole as though they are the geniuses behind the physics of the planet. And they don't really give two craps about anything else except the fact that they're being heard and they're getting paid. So, you know what? Just like the YouTubers before, more power to you, man. You make money blowing off steam, but it doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're talking about.
See, we had a bunch of student robots, but what happened is they kept falling offline anyway. And so we had students that they're wondering where the robots were at.
That's why we ripped out all the technology.
Yeah, they're pissed at school. Lawsuits went crazy, and the students, the robots were just sitting there in the middle of the hallway the whole time. Nobody ever went and checked. And it's well, it didn't come home at night. It's not my fault.
I feel so lucky that we partner with 3M.
Replaced them with cardboard pictures.
You know,
Yeah,
you all
another one
have
of those
nightmare
analog
stories.
solutions for digital problems.
Larry, you guys can afford
Good
cardboard.
Lord.
Yeah,
I thought that was banned under the UN treaty.
No, not as long as it's recycled, but you have to pulp it yourself.
Yeah, it's a brave new world, Chris. I'm sure where you're at, you guys seem to be on the bleeding edge of what's going on. So what have you been up to? It's been a while since we heard from you.
Yeah, so Indiana University has we just completed our 12th campus. And this one's co-sponsored by Salesforce and Lucas Oil. And actually, we're taking over one of Purdue's old campuses in Fort Wayne, so it's a good thing that Purdue's now gone. But they do still have the goal of using as many historic buildings as they can, and some of these date all the way back to the 90s. So, believe it or not, infrastructure is still a challenge there.
Wow.
For the most part,
it was
we're
all going to
using
be wireless. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's so wireless. It's going to be so easy."
Well, for the most part, because of the age of these buildings. I mean, some of these buildings from the 90s. I mean, some of these things they're 50 plus years old, and it's a real pain to deal with. But for the most part, we're using narrowband.
These
gigaburst.
buildings were not designed to last 50 years.
Well, they weren't built to last 50 years either. But so we're using a narrowband gigaburst for video, and we're using wideband ultraburst for audio, and that seems to be working in most places. Generally, I would say our baseline design is we're doing hybrid teaching and learning everywhere. We've been doing that for 20 plus years. I mean, even after COVID-19, and then we had COVID-22, and COVID 34. I know a lot of schools were struggling with how to adapt their learning spaces. Whereas we just kept plugging with what we've been doing since the early 2000s, and it was the model of, well, let's provide the capability for any number of students or any number of instructors to be local to the room, or maybe they're remote, but we want to provide that capability in either direction. Honestly, it's allowed more cross-campus registration for courses, so students don't have to necessarily be tied to a specific campus as part of the larger IU system. So as long as they're enrolled at any one of the IU system campuses or any one of the IU affiliated institutions, it's frankly limited only by how many students the instructor wants in their class. Otherwise, registration is functionally unlimited. I will say recently, as far as hardware stuff, we've had good success with SoundTube's directional Bluetooth systems for providing focused audio steering and open collaboration in cuddle spaces. That's worked out well. We did try out those Biamp Nano mics. They work okay. They work better than their older drone swarm mics, which, we had lots of problems with the batteries on those, just kind of dying early. They wouldn't last a full day. It was a real pain. Speaking of audio, just the other day, our president, he wanted to play music from his smartphone. He had an old smartphone with an actual screen on it, and he wanted to play music from that. That was like 2 hours of us wrangling and trying to put together adapters and things to get that to work. And we ended up re-encoding it and sending it with a negative delay. And it sort of worked, but it wasn't great.
So, Chris, on your, because you had the two different, your video and your audio, were you using satellite sync on that? Did you have like timing issues?
We're doing that all local. We've removed the generators, and we're just accounting for it in software because otherwise it requires additional hardware, and I'm not dealing with that.
And is that wireless PoE?
No. This is Edgar Allan PoE. So we are now doing multiple cameras in every classroom space. Most of them are displays with integrated cameras, like behind the screen. That works well for students. I will say instructors, they hate the drone cams. They just do not like that. They find it distracting. Those things are moving around. They're not great, especially the Kubrick brand ones. Stay away from those. But we have deployed some additional 4D cameras, which are nice because they can record temporarily in reverse, and so they can get things after they happen, which is nice. So that's good to know. I will say, control-wise, we have finally shut down the terrible voice control systems. That so many disconnects, so many things going offline. We had faculty threatening to revolt over these things, so we just pulled all of them. It just was not worth it. That's a pipe dream. That's a fever dream of people who.
That's Jamie's gig though. He's programming all those things when they're not.
So did you upgrade to the thought control systems then, or are you using a different interface?
Yeah. So the cerebral control systems work way better. They understand what you want to do. They're like snap of your fingers. It's great. You don't have to touch anything. But those voice ones, having to figure out the diction and the phrasing, it was not worth it. I know.
I have heard though that the cerebral control systems can make you a little bit nauseous if you're distracted.
Yes, so they do require you to focus a little bit. If you're thinking about additional commands that you would like to do in a couple of minutes, it'll start to try to do those, and so it's going to start pulling thoughts away on that. So it can cause general senses of vertigo. So we've had to work with instructors on that just so they understand the limitations, the capabilities. I will say though, the best thing that we have done in the last number of years, and honestly, this was something that we started dabbling in almost 20 years ago, even prior to COVID. But we finally have fully integrated and implemented it. We've hired instructional designers to be part of our AV team, and this has been fantastic. We've been working with them for 6 or 7 years now as part of our team. And what that means is we can now match curriculum directly to the appropriate space. We work with the registrar directly to schedule people into the appropriate space, though we still do run into that kind of butts in seats model where people will try to schedule based purely on the number of students registered. Now, to your point, some of those are robotic students, but they still want a physical space in the room. And I know even though ADA does allow us to count those robot spaces on walls and ceilings, it isn't great in some of the spaces, so we try to stay just to functional seat spaces and based on square footage.
How does your registrar look at that? Because we see some of those robots where they're crowdsourced ones, where it's one robot serving the mesh network of 25 students. Do they count those as 25 students, or is that one student per robot?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure how we're handling that directly. I do know that we're just looking at the physical number of robots in the room. The registrar does give lower priority if the number of robots in a room does replace the number of students in the space. So if that number goes over 50%, they get lower scheduling priority. However, that doesn't affect if they're doing robotic teaching. So robotic instructors rather, they're after the Robotic Rights Act of 2037, they're pretty much counted the same as physical instructors. So that's is what it is, but we'll deal with it. So
there's a whole other show. We could go on for hours on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how well that's playing out, but. Yeah.
Guys, do you think we'll have enough time to tell that story about the drone robot that killed those 5 people in 2035? Do you think our audience
No, that's an off the rails topic, Justin. We'll have to get into that next week. Yeah.
My bad. I was really wanting to tell that. I haven't told that story in probably, a couple years.
That's because the judge told you to stop.
Oh, yeah. Maybe we need to not tell that story then.
So... Rachel, what are you seeing out there? I mean, how are things going in your world?
Well, I mean, I think you guys have all heard that things are pretty different in Virginia than they are in other parts of the former United States.
As they have been for quite some time.
Yeah, we've always gone our own way. During COVID, popularly, we realized something, that school is a holding area, that it protects society from young people and vice versa. And sure, my kids were theoretically learning things at school, but more importantly, they were firmly physically away from my office. And so too, institutes of higher learning concentrated dangerously annoying and healthy young people away from the public areas that I frequent. Those are the days. Man, so much has changed here. It's by the time in-person schooling reopened in Virginia, most people had given up on keeping their children away from their working lives and had instead just suborned them as apprentices. So when the schools reopened, a lot of us were loath to return our newly trained assistants to their holding areas. What am I supposed to do? Sort my own emails, make my own coffee? I had just taught my 7-year-old how to use pivot tables, and I'm supposed to send her back to 2nd grade to do work for free? Absurd. So the family-based trade guilds that we've got going on here today are a little different than the trade guilds of yore, but I think that our apprentice code engineers and install technicians have it pretty easy compared to the tiny factory workers of the Industrial Revolution. Plus, you cannot deny the utility of those tiny hands if you're pulling cable or trying to get behind a rack. Now, young people do enter adulthood now with a trade, although it is pretty annoying when they start demanding to get paid. But I went to school here in this state. I have a lot of love for the higher education system of the state of Virginia. So it's really nice to see the state college campuses seeing new life as guild halls. I'm not sure that the United Sisterhood of PR Agents strictly needs a football stadium, but it is an excellent space for our weekly Pilates get-togethers. And as a co-working space, the Rotunda simply cannot be beaten. But the empty classrooms do give me pause. These were places where, once upon a time, people were held together, enraptured by the process of learning, primarily to improve their own minds or to collaborate on building a more just or beautiful or free society, inventing the human, like Harold Bloom once said. Incidentally, I think his daughter is now an apprentice video producer at the Greater Boston TikTok Guild.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been to Virginia. Do you all still have those 20-foot walls surrounding your state, keeping everybody else out?
Just around Northern Virginia.
Okay, got it.
No, the rest of the state.
It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about
wilderness.
keeping people in. That's what I always heard.
Sure, true.
Tomato,
That's what they
tomato.
told me.
That's what we tell ourselves anyway.
Well, there you have it. There are 6 terrifying visions of the future from the AV SuperFriends from the year 2041. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a special one because, honestly, we needed a break from trying to figure out how we're addressing COVID-related technology issues. And we thought this might be a fun way to just kind of look at, how things might end up 20 plus years from now. So thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with yet another episode of AV SuperFriends On Topic. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at avsuperfriends.com.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV SuperFriends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.